Hi, I'm Sriram Joshi from T.I.M.E and I would like to share my thoughts with you today about this section called DILR, and I'm going to talk about it in the context of CAT 18, which is coming up at the end of November. For the last few years, everybody is of the opinion that this section, DILR, is the hardest section in CAT. Now, is this impression justified? If you look at the type of questions that have come in CAT, official papers are of course available on the net, and if you look at the student scorecards for last 3 CATs, it's obvious that to get 90 percentile in this DILR section, the marks that you would need are actually much lower than the marks you would need in Quant or in VARC. It also means that this DILR section has been the toughest, the hardest to crack. And therefore, many of you harbor some anxiety and little nervous about approaching this section. It's also true that DILR is not a subject that you study in schools and colleges, and therefore there is an element of nervousness because of that, and we don't know what kind of questions will come, how many, etc., etc. So I want to share my thoughts so that your nervousness, your anxiety could be reduced somewhat. If you take a look at the student scorecards of the last 3 CATs, the last 3 CATs, then it's obvious that if you had got about 10 to 12 questions right, and no questions wrong, no negative marking, then you would have got 90 percentile in DILR. What does it mean? 10 to 12 questions correct. 30 to 35 marks. Now, based on the comment that the CAT examiners have put out in public domain when they released CAT 18 notification, where they said that the process that we've been following for the last 3-4 years has been yielding results, and we are going to continue with that in CAT 18. We can safely predict, of course there is no entire 100% guarantee, that in CAT 18 as well, DILR section would be tough. And so, your first objective should be how to get 30 to 35 net marks in this section called DILR. Please understand, there are 8 caselets generally with 4 questions each. 32 questions total. This is guaranteed. So 96 total marks. So your job is really to get just about 1/3 of these marks in this entire section. So your job is now not to look at all the 8 caselets or all the 32 questions, but to be able to identify and tackle only these many questions. If you back calculate how many caselets you have to do, it really means you have to do only 3 caselets correct. As insurance, you might want to do 4 caselets to allow for some questions being incorrect, etc. So out of 8 caselets, now we are talking about doing only 4 caselets. Not 8 caselets, but only 4. And suddenly, the problem of doing 1 caselet in 7.5 minutes, because you have only 1 hour to do this section, where you would think that you have only 3-4 minutes to read the data and 3-4 minutes to answer 4 questions. Suddenly the time that you can allot to each and every caselet has doubled. Now you can allot up to 15 to 20 minutes per caselet. And you can take your time to understand the data, take your time to understand the questions, and therefore get most of them right and not worry about solving the entire section. Now, how would you go about doing this? There are two elements to it, in my opinion. You should be able to take a look at the data as well as the questions fairly quickly without really reading in detail. If the story is too long, if the introduction of the caselet is too long, I think that's a negative. If the data that is being presented is too complex, there are too many pie charts, there are too many graphs, too many tables, then I think you should not attempt it at the first sight. You must also look at the questions associated with this data. The questions can be unfriendly. And what is the unfriendliness in the questions? Let us look at what is the unfriendliness in the question. There are 3-4 characteristics that make the question unfriendly. Number one, there is question specific data. So not only do you have the story which was told at the beginning of the caselet, but you also have some data associated with that question that you have to take into account while attempting that question. Number two, you have no choices at all, no multiple choice. It's a numeric question, so you have to solve that question. You have no idea where you are going. Number three, the questions may start with maximization and minimization. These are questions that will need more time. Well, the type 4, the chart that may be involved is too big a chart. If there is a seating arrangement, if there is some selection, something like that, there are too many people involved. All these things make the questions unfriendly. And any passage, particularly long passage, with these kind of questions is not something that you would like to do. There are certain topics that come in DI-LR section. First of all, the distinction between DI and LR is decreasing every year. You can't say that 4 questions are on DI and 4 questions are on LR. Every question involves some element of DI, some little bit of calculation or quant, and a little bit of LR. And so you cannot count on being very good in DI and not so good in LR. You have to combine your skills in both these areas. So if you now look at the passage, which is not very long, and where the questions are not too unfriendly, that's the passage you would like to do. And I can guarantee you that you will find 3 to 4 passages of this kind in CAT. They will not come serially, and that's the second part of doing this this section called DI-LR. There are people who would advise you to take 5 to 10 minutes and go over the entire section, all the 32 questions, all the 8 caselets, and then decide which ones to do. I think that's a waste of time. You simply don't have that luxury. In 1 hour, if you want to do even 4 sets, I would start with the first set, if you don't mind, and take a call whether you want to do it or not do it. In fact, in my mind, I will do this kind of categorization. Doable, which I will do immediately. In reserve, looks doable, and if I have time, I'll come back to it. And not interesting. This is the one which has a long story or many of these characteristics, and I will not worry about this passage. So, doable, when I come across a doable, I'll go ahead and do it. When I come across a passage that seems doable, but I don't want to do it right away, I'll keep it in reserve if I have time. So that's what I will do instead of wasting 5 to 10 minutes about reading all the 8 and trying to decide which one. The other thing that I have seen people talk about is that if you want to attempt only 10 to 12 questions, some people say that you can do 1 or 2 questions from each of those 8 caselets and come to this. I think that's not a very good thought, because to attempt even 1 question from the caselet, you'll have to read the caselet, you'll have to understand the data. And which 1 question to do or which 2 questions to do out of 4 is really a puzzle, because maybe the first 2 questions are hard. So don't think of that. I think what you should do is focus on 3 to 4 caselets. Try to do 10 to 12 questions, right? If you keep on pushing towards 4 caselets, this attempt will go to 16. Try to choose passages that have not such a long story, do not have too many unfriendly questions. Do the caselets that you come across seem doable right away, and some in reserve. So in case you are able to do all of these, you can come back to this. Basically what I'm saying is, if you don't have to do eight caselets, you don't have to push for speed. In fact, you should never push for speed in an artificial way. The speed is a result of your practice and your skill. So do practice, do achieve a decent speed. Don't have to slow down unnecessarily, but do not push for speed. The other thing, which is more psychological and more, personal, is that as a human being, this section being the second section in CAT, and if you do not do this section well, then there is an unfortunate hangover when you come to the third section called Quant. And even when you may be an expert in Quant, all the thoughts that are going on in your mind regarding the DILR section spoil your performance in that section. So I have a very small tip there. When 2 hours are over and this DILR section goes away from your computer screen, please close your eyes, take a deep breath, and tell yourself, thank God, the most difficult part of this CAT is over. And if you, now whatever you've heard, you find that it may have been very useful or somewhat useful, please do subscribe to this channel, send in your comments and suggestions. If you have some doubts and difficulties, no problem, send us that too, and wish you all the best. Thank you very much. Do well.